Hi everyone. Just gonna let Aditi in. Thank you, Azra, for joining us today, and I'm really excited to see how you actually make your loom and how you do your weaving. Azra is actually a fellow UAL graduate from LCC, and she's an artist and a writer. And I just want to understand that the journey that you are on, which takes you between these two spaces where you're working with textiles, and you just told me you also make handmade paper, and you also write, and you've done all these things that you've also put together very beautifully in the book that we'll get to later. Like, how do you put all of this together? Like, how does this happen? Like, what all do you do? Because I know your profile is quite you do a lot of different kinds of things, so it's quite diverse but still joined really nicely with these threads through it. So can you please tell us about that before you actually start?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. So I began my creative journey, like you said, at LCC, and I initially started working with film, with typography, with installations and sensors and things like that. And then I joined advertising and I started doing illustration. But I found that writing was something that I was very fond of doing, and I slowly moved into that role. And then I began writing about art, and it began as a blog, but I got published in Art India and Hakara and Design Pataki. And then I started writing more full time, but I also did exhibitions. I was part of Arshia Lokhandwala's The Future is Here, and for that I made emoticon artwork. So there was one where you stood in front of the sensors, and as you moved, the emoticons would change, and another where you could put two emoticons together to create a different emotion. And then I ended up going to Sowing Seeds Art Residency, where I made not electric, bone sitar, sorry. So I used animal bones that I found in the mountains to create a musical instrument. And yeah, so this project also kind of came from that because I wanted to make books. And I started creating sustainable books. So I used recycled paper, and I started making these little textile covers. And yeah, there's like a bunch of different ones with different threads. And this is what I'm going to sort of teach you how to make today. This is the first loom that was created. It's made from bamboo, and there are nails in the top, but they're sort of shifty. So I've also tied them with string. And the way you thread this up, I have some resham thread here. So the way you thread this up is you tie one end in sort of a slip knot. Sorry, you can't see this. Mm.
So do we have to nail the pieces of wood together, or can we just tie it like you've done? Because I feel like that may be easier for us to achieve.
It
It'll still
moves.
move. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, if not nail it. I mean, I don't know how else you would do it, because for wood you do need something nailed down to kind of hold it all together.
Yeah.
And then you sort of, this is how you string it up. And on the edges I use the saw to make sort of grooves so that it's easier to kind of hold the thread, so sort of even on both ends, so that they sort of line up on both sides, so that when you're stringing up the loom, it kind of aligns. So you keep going to the end. I won't show you the whole process because of time constraint, but basically you string each one to one groove at the end of it. So you have sort of these lines going through completely. So this is what it looks like sort of at the end. And this is a loom that I like worked on with a carpenter to kind of put together used wood to create this. And then after that, you use sort of, you can just tie on like a little scrap of your fabric, and you want to sort of, it's, you go around the string at the back, and then forward push this string in front, and then again go down the string at the back. So you're basically putting these two threads which are at the front and the back, you're pushing them together so that they all sort of come together to form the fabric. So you'll just see that in a second on this side.
And the size of the frame basically depends on what size of artwork you want to keep making, right? So you can keep changing that.
Exactly. So the first one I showed you was quite small. Then the second one was a square frame. This is more rectangular, so you have a little more room. So yeah, it's a little bit of a tedious process, and you have to keep like pushing these up because they start slacking. But as you can see, like as you pull them together and you want to sort of hold them really tight, they start to form this sort of fabric. So again, I'm going round the front of the first string and then round the back of the second string. So it's up and around and then down and under. And all you need is like thin strips of fabric. So like this was quite an uneven fabric, but I've just cut this off, and now I can just keep cutting them into thin strips to form the rest of the fabric that goes through. So yeah, so slowly you'll start to see that the strings are coming together, and that will eventually sort of create the entire fabric of the loom. I can go back to this in a little while. I just wanted to show you some other stuff that I've made with the loom. So this is a much larger piece, but this is what it starts to look like in the end. So you have all your fabric strung up from top to bottom. So these are, each line of fabric has been sort of woven in and out to kind of push the two strings together to create the fabric. And you can completely use recycled material for this, because you all you need is like any sort of cloth that you're not using anymore, just cut into thin strips. So any sort of even fabric that are cut offs or weirdly shaped can be sort of re purposed in a way to create your own piece. And then at the end, you just want to sort of go on top of this with a blade so that you have these two strings, and then you tie them at the ends, each string at the end, like this string and this string would go together, for example. I don't know if you can see this clearly, but basically these two strings and then the next two strings and the next two strings to kind of bind both the sides together so that these threads don't come loose. So let me show you on a piece. So each of these ends are tied together to kind of bind the fabric together. and then this is what you come out with. So all the pieces of fabric, like you would want to cut this into thin strips and then keep going round the loom. And then as you run out of fabric, you can start with the next layer of fabric. And then as you keep going, like depending on what fabric you use, you'll get very different results. Also, depending on what thread you use. So this is very thick thread, for example. So as I've done the weaving process, and then this was very thin cloth, so it's got a very different effect from, say, a much thicker cloth here. So yeah, that's how you sort of weave together the fabric. And you can also create shapes. I'll show you another piece that I made. So it's quite funny, but these are sort of underpants that I'm trying to create. And I've created a jacket for it as well. So by skipping sort of layers in the loom, you can create shapes. So if you want to make a triangle, for example, you just skip one thread each. Or if you want to make a circle, you'll start with one, and then you'll add two and two and two and two, and that's how you make sort of shapes in the fabric. And this is sort of like a dress that I made from the fabric. Okay, I'm just going to tilt this upwards. So this is sort of like a jacket, and then the bottom will sort of come in here. And these are actually cuffs that go on the arms. So in the end, it's going to kind of turn into a full piece, but I'm going to use normal cloth for it as well. So here, I made this on the large loom as well, where I've made triangles, and then I've just done sort of lines connecting the two. And of course, like this, you'll need a dress model if you want to make clothes on the loom, because for your sizing and things like that. So that's how that effect can be created as well. So this is sort of, yeah, like a bustier piece with the bottom, and then adding sort of normal fabric to create even an outfit from the loom. So these have sort of been my explorations with the material and the with the technique. And yeah, like if we have more time, I would love to show you more of the loom itself, because yeah, like I don't know if you'll completely understand how to make this yet, but it's
Also, maybe you can talk about how you actually attach it onto that when you start weaving, and then how do you keep it as a continuous piece? So, how does the next piece come in?
the next piece of thread.
Yeah. Or the next piece of
Sorry,
fabric.
this piece of fabric, you tie the end. So like I've made a small knot here to tie it to the thread. When this thread gets over, and the other thing is, like, once you finish a line, it just goes under. Like you don't have to weave the second half. Like once you come to the end, say, of this first line, you'll just pull the thread underneath it, and it'll automatically sort of fit into this fabric. It won't fit here because I haven't done the process, but this is how sort of it comes together. And then again, you'll sort of go back and you'll reweave this bit. And as you go, it gets a little harder because the strings get closer and closer together, especially at the ends. Like in the even in these, you can see that um where is it? Yeah, like at the ends it's a little tighter than at the middle, because the ends, you're constantly like pulling this together, and you're trying to make it as tight as possible. in order to get the effect, because otherwise your fabric is going to be really loose if you don't pull it. So you want to keep pulling the ends together, and as you yeah, maybe I can do one line just so that you can understand how the second line comes in. Yeah, maybe we can show them the book in the meantime, and I'll just finish doing one line so that y'all can see the second line come in, if that's okay.
Do you sometimes work with the needle at one end if you have a large enough needle hole?
And like I've tried with a metal wire,
Yeah,
where you just take the wire and you wrap it in the center so that it gives you like a needle eye,
yeah,
and you can put the end of the fabric in it, and it does work. But then eventually I just preferred using my fingers to it. But yeah, initially like it can be a little tedious, especially without a needle, because with a needle you can string more than one thread together. The
yeah.
only thing is then, sometimes you miss a thread and then you have to go back and open it. So say I missed a thread here, like say if I had missed this thread, I just go back and open it,
Yeah,
and then till wherever I've missed, and then I go back and I catch that.
right.
But again, you don't have to, because it's your creativity, it's your piece, and this is all hand done. So um because otherwise you could do it on a giant loom, like the loom machines that you get, and then you'll get like the perfect sort of fabric and the perfect sort of piece. So
Right.
this is how, like, the ends, like you just have to tuck them back in and push them up. So that's how you get sort of one line of fabric in there. And then you start the process again from this end.
And of course, then you can start experimenting with weave patterns, right?
Yeah.
Eventually.
So now say like, okay, I've started this line, but say if I started this line here, so you'd have one, like two lines, and then you'd have like something here. Or if you wanted to make a circle, you'd start with just two of these, and then you'd continue and sort of, you know, keep expanding. Or in a triangle, you'll just start missing, two strings, three strings at a time. So as you miss these, you'll automatically start getting, a shape in there. So this is just the basic one where you sort of go round, you know, straight, for which you will get these, where they're just squares. So
And
yeah, you
you
can
are you
the
sharing the video?
Yes, I will share the video.
Believer by Azra Bhagat. When I go to a party or hang with friends, people inevitably ask, "Do you believe in God?" And I could respond and say no, because the image of an aged man with a long white beard sitting up there in the clouds, watching my every move, is not something I could possibly believe. But I do believe. I believe in beauty and truth and compassion and integrity. I believe in love and empathy. And most of all, I believe in the goodness of people, even when they can't see it themselves. And I don't think that makes me weak. Because you see, it's not the strong ones who attack, for the simple reason that they don't need to. And you can call it what you want to, God or Yahweh, Allah or Brahma, Tao or the oneness. But what you are actually saying is, I don't care how much life pushes me down. If I fall, I will get up. What you are saying is, I have faith, and that is the most powerful feeling of all. What allows us to wake up every morning, what helps you to get on the bus, believing it will take you to the right place, what makes you human, and what gives you the power to exist, to be, to breathe, and to enjoy every single day, not knowing what will happen even before you walk out your door.
Okay, should we also try like a triangle on this one just to show you, or a circle or something? So I'll just do a small shape so that we don't waste time. But basically, all you need to do is like tie this to one end. And you don't have to like thread the whole thing. If you're doing a smaller piece, you can just tie it at the end on the side so that you don't, you don't waste your thread, because at the end, you're going to have to cut everything from the top.
So right now you're just following the one up, one down pattern.
Yes, this is the same thing you do for the first line of a triangle, will be the same thing that you do for the first line of a square.
Right.
And now say this is like the bottom of your triangle, right? So you want to go round and like complete this first layer. So I think already on a smaller scale, you can see like how the fabric is created. And then here, I'm just going to miss 2 strings. So I'm going to miss the last 2 strings on this side to make it that much smaller. And again, like you'd want it to be as pulled together as possible. And then sort of go back. And this one won't happen perfectly because the edges are not, so it's always a little narrow on the edges and a little broader in the center. But essentially you'd just be skipping, when you do it at a full size, it'll work out because you'll just be skipping these 2 threads and these 2 threads at the end. So then you skip sort of these these two. So you can experiment like that with all sorts of different shapes, or if you're making a certain cut of a material, then you'd want to, like, again, here I'm missing two. So depending on what you're trying to create, and if you have like a piece of clothing or cloth, or even if you draw it on paper and you cut it, you'll see that you're making, and then you like add. So say I have a piece of fabric that I want in a circular way, so I'll just fill it in that way. I won't complete all the threads. So here you have like a more uneven pattern or shape. So you're getting sort of like a triangle in there. So yeah, maybe we can try another shape here as well.
I mean, if anyone has any questions at this point, if someone wants to ask anything, please do ask.
I'm interested. I mean, you normally can use a shuttle also, right? That'll already have the fabric rolled in, and that can easily make things faster, right?
Yes. So initially, like when I created this loom, I was also like toying with the idea of adding like a second layer of wood on one side, and then, sorry, on like one of these sides, and then having like a layer here which would open. So like putting these together, but then I wasn't sure like whether I would need one of these or two of these, and how to connect one side to the other. So on a giant loom, what happens is you have two. You have one of these, and then you have another one, and then you open it and close it. So you open it, you put the fabric, you close it, you put the fabric, you open it, you put the fabric. So you don't have to go through the actual process of doing it by hand. You like that's how the massive looms sort of do all the weaving of cloth in our country. So it's just threads going through, and then they close it, and then it's another thread going through, and they close it, and it's another thread. But what I'm doing is I'm using fabric, because my model for this was not to use thread and not to use something that's already sort of in a usable form. I wanted to use something that is usually disposed. So a lot of the material I got, like, they are literally just scraps of fabric. So I segregated the ones that were longer, and I decided to use those for the project. And then these sort of smaller scraps, I've actually made like tarp out of it. So I've just stitched them together to make its own fabric again. So these smaller pieces, you can still cut them into if you cut them into strips, you can still use them on the loom and sort of weave them together. But what I chose to do is just to use the longer strips and then use the smaller strips in a different project. So that's how that kind of happened. So yeah. So they're basically all it's all scrap material. So that was kind of the idea, even when it came to the books, that I would use scrap material or material that you can't reuse usually, and use art to kind of reuse these materials. So it was a little bit of a project and sustainability in that sense.
So when you make your paper, how do you do that? Do you do that completely by hand, or do you have someone you collaborate with to make the paper?
So for the paper, at the moment, I'm using newsprint.
Do you have a sample of the paper around you for us to see?
Actually, it went into the book, and I could not find the two books that I made this morning. Like one of them is on Instagram, the other one is not posted yet. But yeah, basically it's newspaper, and then you need a similar sort of frame. It's a smaller frame than this, and you can staple on mosquito net
Yeah.
in order to create the base for the paper, and you need a sort of a large mouthed bucket, and then you put all your scraps of newsprint or scraps of paper that you want to reuse, and you can add flowers. So that's how how I got the texture of flowers onto the paper that I used in the book.
Yeah.
And you scoop the mosquito netted frame, and then you uh, transfer it onto some more mosquito net, you dry it, and that's how you sort of recycle paper and reuse
Is
it.
there a binder in it to keep it all together, or just the natural? Is there any something that the newspaper allows it to stay together, or do you need to put a binder into it?
Yeah, so that's the beauty of newsprint. So if you add a little bit of newsprint to other paper, it
Got it.
just automatically binds, because newsprint automatically has a binding agent in it in the paper.
Yeah. Hmm.
So
I have a question. As a multidisciplinary artist, how are you finding your base and your collaborations, or like how are you going to the next step and then exploring a different medium altogether and then having exhibitions or showcase on them already? So what's your process about? Like, that's pretty interesting.
So basically, it just happens. I get interested by something, and then I start making towards it. So when it came to the loom, it was more about the books that I wanted to make recycled books, and I saw these sort of covers. I saw these as covers um, that could work, you know. So that's how the loom project started. But then I got sort of sidelined by it, and I started making outfits out of it, or I started making shapes within the fabric that I said, okay, this can be made into clothing. When it came to the bone sitar, it was more okay, can I make songs out of this? Like can I actually play this as an instrument and sing along, or like add sort of my own music, because the kind of notes that were coming out of it, because I used sitar strings, because in the village there was a sitar maker, and he is the person who actually made the wooden pegs for me for the instrument, and I added these sort of sitar strings to it. So it was more about that. And then the current project I'm working on, which is a sound project, um, it's going to be featured at the Kochi Biennale. So for that, it's more about the content of letters that I'm using to sort of now transfer that into a sound project. So it really depends. Like it depends on what sort of vehicle I'm looking for to express a certain feeling, or a certain poem, or a certain text that I've written or found material, and then using that to create different artworks. And then the depending on how I envision that, I decide on the different materials that I'm going to use for it. But it can also happen the other way around. Like sometimes I really like a certain materiality, and I decide to work everything around that.
So, can I ask you? So, when you're doing something that's so cross-disciplinary, how does it work? So, when you're talking about your story, or when you're putting across like you're profiling yourself, suppose, right? What would you say is the one thing that is consistent amongst all the different kind of art that you, or different kind of material or output that you're creating? Is there a particular thread that runs through everything? Like, is there a particular like value system that's constantly there? because the mode is changing, right? But like,
Yes.
is there something in particular that keeps coming back through every mode or every material?
Um, I would say that it's not really like a certain value system. It's more like what I'm thinking of on that day. You
Okay.
know, it's not one exact theme that I'm working towards. So this one was sustainability, or the dead letters. Sorry, the letter project is about memory, or the emoticon project is more about technology. And then again, exhibitions come with their briefs,
Right.
so it's also working towards that. So for futures here, it was more the brief was more about technology, so I decided I would use emoticons because it has to do with communication. So I guess like art and communication would be sort of the theme, but then the way I use it is also it kind of works with each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyone have any other questions for her? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. So, since you were showing us different shapings that you have done with the weaving. So, do you also explore with these structures of weaving? Like, usually there are a few structures, right, in weaving. So, I mean, are there any other explorations you've done other than one technique, or do you use any other techniques as well?
No, not really. I mean, weaving, again, like I've never been trained in textiles or anything like that.
Okay.
It just, it's like it's part of like my art practice to explore new mediums. So
Okay.
a lot of it is self-taught. A lot of it is, if you have any sort of structures that I could follow or learn from, I would love to know them, and I would love to incorporate that into my work. But a lot of it, like even the bone instrument that I made, it was like getting people to use a power drill on a bone. And there was a instance when one of the drills sort of collapsed, and it sort of the whole drill bent. And then a farmer in the village told me that you should put water so that the drill doesn't heat up so much that it bends.
Oh.
So it's all a learning process, and because I'm using so many materials, like if I was sticking to one medium, then I guess I would know a lot more about it and explore it a lot more. But the way my practice has developed, it's been more different materials, different modes of communication. So even writing, like writing about art, was like a completely different experience, coming from the background of a copywriter, which was the only experience of writing I had at the time. And then moving, I used to write poetry. So that was a completely different medium. And then because I was writing poetry, I decided, I can make these little sustainable books. And I used the sort of handloom initially to just make covers. And, bookmaking and weaving kind of go together. You end up stitching the book together, or, in the way that you bind them. So that was also sort of a learning process for me.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time and showing us what you do. And it's always very fascinating to see how everyone takes on different materials and puts them to use in different ways. So thank you. And if anyone has any questions, please ask now, or else we're gonna let her go. And oh wait, okay, I thought there was a question.
Not a question, but I just wanted to compliment you on your approach. It's a really fascinating approach um, to be creative with different mediums.
Thank
Because so many times I feel that we try to restrict ourselves to what we have learned or just one way of being, whereas there is when you collaborate and bring all the learnings together, that's when it becomes really fascinating. So just wanted to tell you that it's amazing work. Keep it up.
thank
Thank
you so
you.
much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.